Hi, everyone. Hi, everyone. My name is Patricia Kong. I really appreciate the opportunity to be with you guys today. It's really funny when I was building this talk, I felt a lot, it always feels like when you're building a talk or even some training, a lot like you're talking to yourself. And now I really feel like I'm talking to myself because I'm just talking out loud now and staring at a screen. But I appreciate the opportunity to be here at Agile Shift Houston and to be able to talk to you during this month about some things that we're thinking about at scrum.org. So I'm glad that Improving was able to reschedule this and make this something that's actually really cool, right, every day during this month. So I hope to see this be something that continues moving forward because it's really exciting. My talk today for you is going to be about why on time, on budget, and fixed scope isn't working. I should say isn't working. Measurement, governance, all that stuff. And it's around a lot of the things that we've been thinking about around evidence-based management, which I'll talk to you about, and a little bit around essentially portfolio management. So I'm going to get into that. My understanding, and I'm sorry I was a couple minutes late, technical glitch, user error on my behalf, but my understanding is we have an hour. So if you could submit your questions at the end, keep them coming actually. I think you can keep them coming and I will be taking the questions at the end. So with that, let's get going. I am, again, from scrum.org. If you're not familiar with scrum.org, we provide a lot of training and education, but we're really focused around community. We're owned by Ken Schwaber, who's the co-creator of Scrum. He's one of my buddies, and we really value working with communities. So we're always interested in having these types of conversations. Improving is one of our partners, and it's been a joy to work with them to be able to reach out to all different sorts of Agile communities in the United States. Now, who is Scrum.org? Again, we're a mission-based company. We work to improve the profession of software delivery. We're really thinking about professionalism at all tiers of the organization. And I am, quickly, Patricia Kong, and I head our enterprise solutions and leadership. So what I do, and I've been at scrum.org for 7 or 8 years, but I have a corporate past, but a lot of that has gone from investment services to over to technology. So a lot of startup background, but what I do at scrum.org is I think about enterprise solutions, which means the goodness that we find at Scrum and Agile at the team level, how are we exploiting that at the enterprise level? And so scaling is part of that. We have a book, the Nexus Framework for Scaling Scrum. If any of you have heard about Nexus, that's coming out of our camp. And then all I think about these days is evidence-based management. How do we use evidence to make the best decisions that we can? And again, we're all about improving professionalism. So my direct contribution to that is to mentor underserved youth at an organization called Europe. So mentoring is something that is really important to me, but especially at an organization like Europe, because we're helping to bridge the opportunity gap. So that's something, if you're interested in checking out helping 18 to 21-year-olds, may be interesting to you. I am an organizational behavior person, and because of that, I moved over into agility and Scrum when my back was against the wall. So I was wondering, why is everybody behaving the way they are? What is going on? All right. So usually I start this differently, but I'm gonna ask you guys anyways, because I'm sure we've all been sitting at our desks all day, and I just want you to raise your hand if you're in Agile Transformation. And I want you to raise your hand if you're tired. And I want you to know I cannot see you, but this is how I imagined kicking this talk off. But look at these people with all their hands raised. You know what these guys and gals are doing? They are in an Agile transformation. They are feeling it. They are using Scrum. It doesn't matter if they did it using waterfall or, which still happens, even though, you know, people think, oh, we're over that. But they're drinking the juju, right? So they're all about the agile transformation within their teams, and we're looking at that. And here's the question that always comes back: are we agile yet? How's the transformation? So the interesting thing about that is that that's not the real question we're trying to ask, is it? The real question is, are we better? Was it worth it? And somebody else might be asking you that question, or you might be asking that question. But the thing is how do we respond? And how we typically respond is what I see, and the measurements that I see have a lot to do with progress measurements. So this is about the initiatives that we made. Are they even better when we're talking about Agile? And so you might see things like, and this is what I will hear is, yes, Agile is amazing. It's 99% now, our predictability, and it used to be in the 40s. We are releasing. We used to only release once a year. We're releasing now once every 6 months. We're releasing once a month, once a sprint. We've completed this many stories. Or maybe the Scrum Master is saying, hey, this is amazing. Yes, we're doing well because velocity isn't falling. We're releasing faster. We have Scrum boards. We're using Kanban. Essentially, here's all the stuff we're doing, right? And that's typical in the way that we might describe things in an output mindset, right? And so this is the scope, cost, time. And it's traditionally what we know, and it's actually what we find a little less complex because of what we know. And by the way, this mantra of this triangle was created by software delivery. The thing is that when you're using progress as your main guide, that can be misleading, and it's going to misalign business and delivery organizations. So if you're wondering why, when we think about these things and why we feel like we've hit that barrier, it's essentially because we've misaligned two different types of systems, right? A traditional system and an agile system. So what does that really mean, and what can we think about from here? What I would say is that don't forget, when we talked about Scrum and Agile, it was really looking at 3 different outcomes. We're looking to increase business value, we're trying to decrease non-value adding waste, and we're managing risk exposure. A lot of the times, I think that the teams themselves and organizations generally forget this, or they're not aware of it. They're like, that's that stuff that the teams do, right? And we might see that. The teams are super happy. I can see the teams getting happier. I feel happier. That is legit, right? Employee satisfaction and what we can do is really important. But when you're at the organization level, you sometimes are like, I see and I understand that the teams are getting happier, and you have a Scrum Master saying this is working, the teams are happier, but the organization may feel like there's no transparency into what's going on. And I would assert that it's because you're not able to really look at outcomes. If you're just looking at the process and we're doing all these things and that's great, it works. But that misalignment, again, is what's happening between, let's say, business and delivery, or the people who have to do the work and the business, right? If that's how your company is aligned. But generally what we see is the teams feel like this, but the business feels like this, right? What is going on? We're spending money. I don't have a transparency into anything. Why is this happening? And it's because of these 3 things. Solutions are disconnected from outcomes. And the estimates and the people who are going to do the work are locked in conjecture, right? There's a lot of hypotheses that are going on, or just guesses. And the risks are then amplified by delay and denial. And this is true when, for instance, you can even recently, I was talking to somebody and he's looking at a contract, and he was telling me about how his CEO got upset at him because he basically called bullcrap on the contract. He said, there is no way, you guys have sold this, but there is no way that we're going to get all of this stuff done by the time that you said for the client. There's just no way. And there's The thing is when they're doing that, there's this disconnect, and yet people will say, you know what, fine, we'll do it. And they'll keep reporting up onto those same things, right, into the magic triangle. So really think about that, about outcomes, right? So if we're thinking about outcomes and we know why we invest to do things, now we can have a different conversation. But again, when we're not, the agility is really stalled and our goals aren't aligned. So the notion of our ability to even become effective, this whole notion of we're trying to become agile, it's severely limited, right? And our transformation don't get me going, is only at the team level. So what this is really saying, there's a couple things that I want to talk about here, is that we can see perhaps, that happy team, the woman with the ugly Microsoft sweater, super happy, right? But the limit of the benefits of Scrum and Agile are maybe deep within that team or the delivery organization, but it hits the walls, right? So your transformation is limited into those walls. And, you may start to change those different processes. You may try to align your product organization still within the walls. Maybe it widens a little bit more. And there's the thing besides thinking about how we actually think about outcomes and how we think about goals and what we actually value. That's one piece of it. But there's also this other tangent that I want to say is that this transformation at the team level, and I don't know if you see this to be true also, is something that I find a lot of time leadership will come in and this can be guilty of everything and anywhere, but the transformation is on them. It's not on me. We're not being inclusive. The change needs to happen with them. And that's resonates with me when we're thinking about, current events, but it's not talking about inclusiveness. About as a leader, I buy into this notion that we have to be agile, but how can I participate? I was literally just talking to a client who was saying, we want a transformation. Okay, what are your goals? What are you trying to do? I don't want to talk about my goals. I need transformation. It needs to happen by fall. This is last week's conversation. So it still happens, right? And when I bet he's talking about that transformation, he is talking about, first I want to be transformed, whatever that may be, but it's somebody else. It's something else that needs to be transformed. And then it's not having those tough conversations about those goals and what goals need to be aligned. So I propose that we have a different triangle. And I wouldn't take this too seriously because I only created it yesterday. But the three things on the right side that are important for me to convey for everybody to think about is around values, value, goals, and outcomes. So instead of scope, time, and budget, how can we think about if we're hitting that balance in terms of value, goals, and outcomes? And this doesn't have to be a triangle, but it makes sense. And you'll notice that I put in on the left side power, perspective, and people. I'll talk about that a little bit later, but it's a play on for Brene Brown. She talks about owning your own story. She talks about a lot of different things around leadership, but she talks about 3 Ps, and for her, those are power, privilege, and perspective. So when I'm thinking about organizations and how we interact with people, right? Organizations is a bunch of people working together. How do we think about power, right? So power and status, because, we can talk about value, goals, and outcomes all day, but if we don't talk about the things that actually hold back, like people's notion of status in their organization, some of the psychological stuff, perspective, understanding why, or, believing people when they talk about that, and that people actually do the work, and we're trying to actually just scale self-organization. How can we have a conversation about anything really being transformative? So I'll hit that later. Oops, but for now, let's talk about value, goals, and outcomes. And that's not in a particular order of importance, but let's hit on value. So the notion here in evidence-based management, EBM, if you've heard about it, is that we think about value and in 4 different areas. So these we call the KVAs, and it's this little funny circle diagram. But if you look at the top right, what you're going to see is an area called current value. So we talk to organizations and we think about, can you start to define value in these different areas? what are the areas that you need help in? What would you measure in those areas? Are you measuring anything in those areas now? And how would that manage? How would you manage differently? What decisions would you make if you were to able to have the information there? So if you were able to get the evidence and the measurements in those different KVAs, how could you start to say, you know what, I'm trying to make this decision. Let's understand where we are now in terms of value. We're trying to get here. How do we move? So what would we measure again? So in the top right-hand corner, you have current value, and that's saying what value is the organization currently delivering? Where are we now? And if you move left, you're going to see unrealized value, and is what is happening outside the organization? What is that potential value? Is there a lot of potential? Is there not a lot of potential? You know, but when we think about what we have now, let's see if it's something that we should even pursue. Is there some sort of thing that we want to build or some new market we want to pursue? Is that worth it, right? So we're looking on the top for current value and unrealized value at the market. And then what we have is, okay, so we're thinking about those things, but can we actually do it? So that's what we call organizational capability. So you're going to be looking at time to market. How long does it take to deliver new value? And ability to innovate. Are you effective at improving value, right? So can you even do that? And I'll dive into these a little bit. So current value, it's where we typically focus, right? So the goal, it says here, is to maximize the value that an organization delivers to customers and stakeholders at the present time, to users, right? So how satisfied are people today? How happy are your employees? How happy are investors and stakeholders? So that's very generic. What I urge people to think about is the user for your service or product, or maybe you're in an entirely different industry, and maybe you're building something that helps serve other people within your industry. Maybe it's, you know, I know there's a lot of oil and gas where we are. But what is the reason that a user or a customer, let's talk about it in that way, what do they want from your product or service? What are they trying to do? And so one example, and this is where we start thinking about outcomes, is really thinking about that person who's going to experience what you have, right? So this is a selfie. There's some really happy teenagers. And when we look at the product, what we're thinking about is an iPhone, is about the camera. And we're thinking about the little chat icon. And what the users are really thinking about when they're choosing a phone, right? When they're looking at features is, can I take these awesome pictures of myself? Can I look beautiful? Is my face gonna look slim? Can I get some makeup on? And can I take that with all my friends and then send the picture to them, right? Or put this on my social media. Can my phone do that? So we're starting to talk about what they would like to experience. And that's something, for instance, from a phone perspective. When we're talking about maybe someone who's working in the oil industry and we're trying to build safety precautions for them, maybe for them it's about how safe can I be and be successful at my work? How can I minimize the amount of errors, because those are life-threatening and quite expensive in terms of monetary value. How do we, maybe that's the most important thing to me as the consumer of, you know, this product that I'm going to be using, or a pamphlet, or whatever it is. But thinking about it from outside in is essentially what we're thinking about for terms of outcomes. And that's really, I think, very specific for your organization. So one thing you could do for your product or service is start to ask yourself that question. What is it? What is the outcome? What does the customer want for this? And that's something that you could measure specifically to yourself. All right, so unrealized value is there a reason that we should even be pursuing this? So maybe we, you know, there's a lot of opportunity to extract oil from the lake I'm looking at, which is not true. But maybe we don't want to do that because prices are low. Maybe there is no reason to provide, you know, really basic 1-hour swim trainings because the market is saturated. Who knows? But is it worth it, right? And so balancing those two things and looking at those two things and thinking about it from someone who's going to consume the product or service is what we're thinking about here. Where we focus on deeply, right? So those are market perspectives. So can we do it? Is time to market? How long is this going to take us? So I urge people and companies to think about what's bringing you forward, but what's really bringing you back. So we've done things like value streaming with companies, and they were like, for sure, it's because we don't have the right tools that we need. And when we say, hey, can you actually do this? The reason why it's slowing you down is because you're between groups, you have a very heavy approval process. Do you need that approval process? Why is it there? So your time to market, there are things that you can do that you want to shorten those bottlenecks if you're trying to do stuff, right? So how fast can you do that? How fast can you learn? Those are things that we think about and measure in that area. And where we usually get frustrated, because if we're struggling with our time to market, is our ability to innovate. Do we actually innovate? What's holding us back from innovation? Do we have a lot of safety precautions that we're looking at that don't actually, they're not relevant anymore? Are we looking and suffering from a lot of technical debt? Why is that? Maybe we took that on at one point, but now that's not something that's relevant anymore. Why are we struggling with the way that the system that we have, the architecture of our system? It's because probably decades ago, we were optimizing for cost. So this was the funniest way and the cheapest way that we could do something, right? And now that's holding us back. So the thing is that when you look at all these things holistically, right? And you're saying, you know what, really right now, what I'm trying to improve is our ability to innovate. Or really right now, what I'm trying to improve is our time to market, our capability to do things. Because our customers want stuff and we can't get it out to them. Well, let's pick out some of the things and have an hypothesis about what we could try to improve and see if it affects those other areas too, right? Because now we can have a more thorough conversation about value and measuring value and talking about outcomes, because we might be able to do things. Maybe we can do things and deliver, as much as we want. But if no customer or if nobody cares about it, or if nobody's consuming what you're building, then essentially you're not getting value, right? So that conversation about value is important, and thinking about outcomes and how they're all related to each other. So what you're seeing in this really beautiful graphic here is a magic wand. But what this is if you think about where you currently are and you want to improve, so this is part of evidence-based management in terms of we're going to measure, but measurement is only as good as what you do with it, right? And the decisions that you can make, and thinking about things holistically. So you have where you are now, your current state, and you've said, you know what, I'd like to improve X. So what is the experiment that I can try? And what is that next target state that I can get to? Oh, and by the way, what is the goal of doing this? And so, here's a layman's experience. So we might say your goal, somebody's goal is, hey, I want to lose weight. And we would say, okay, well, that's a nice goal, but it's not really a big goal of something that really that you think you'd like to achieve in terms of, is that something that's going to motivate you? Is there something, there's a decision, yes, you've made to lose weight, but why, right? And so they say, hey, you know what? And I'm talking about myself. I want to get healthy. Okay, so that's super vague, right? So what are you actually, think deeper. What is that big thing that you'd like to target? And so recently I've been doing a lot of research on something called a super ager, right? So super agers are people in their 70s, 80s, 90s who are really strong in terms of mental and physical capabilities of their decades younger counterparts, right? And you're going to be looking at, well, what makes somebody a super ager, right? And it might be about stress, and it might be about, the physical things that they can do, and the value of importance of relationships. So you start to say, what is it that I would need to do to get there, and why do I want to do that? So it's because, when I'm older, and these are just things I'm experiencing with aging parents right now, but I want to be able to carry groceries up the stairs. I want to be able to go up and down the stairs, no problem. 70, 80, 90. I want to be go up the stairs, and I want to be able to carry my own groceries, and I want to be able to do those things. So when you think about that, okay, what would be that next target state? So here I am now, I'm physically very capable and all those things, but what are the things that you would want to do to get to that next target state? So maybe it's about strength training. Maybe it's about, increasing memory, all those different things. But it's a different way to think of a goal than to just be very ambiguous about it, but also make sure that it's something meaningful to you. When I'm talking about goals in terms of EVM, when we talk about current value and unrealized value, that's usually where the goals we find exist, right? So there's some sort of satisfaction gap. There's something that's happening that we want to close for in the market for our customers or for new customers. Let's pursue something there. And that makes the goal pretty strategic and also measurable, right? So we're trying to close that gap. But we know that goals, right? So we have this, they'll evolve and the measurements will evolve. And an easy way to think about that right now is with COVID and what's going on right now, right? So restaurants, they probably have these different goals. We want to provide a really personal experience, or we want to be able to, have quality food at an affordable price for our customers. But whatever they're doing right now and all the measurements that they were taking before, how long did it take to do a delivery? How long to get out of the kitchen? What are the Yelp reviews? What are all those things? Who knows if those things are relevant anymore? Because right now they're trying to survive COVID. They're trying to keep with the value and the mission of the experience that they provide, but those measurements might change, right? So right now, if we can only, at least in Boston, do patio seating, if we can only do, if everybody has to be apart, then maybe the measurement becomes how fast does it take to turn over a table? How many seats can we get in? How many complaints do we have? And the reason that we're thinking about it's really relevant is because I have a PSC friend who was telling me that at a restaurant nearby him, a woman actually got upset and punched a young server because she didn't get her cheesy bread fast enough, right? So there's these things about, wow, do people have to worry in our restaurants, right? We all go and eat at restaurants. Are they worried and measuring different things, and how do they consider success, right? So goals, measurements, all those things will evolve, but it's nice to have those in mind. Now, the reason that I talk about goals, and of course they need to be, ordered and reevaluated, is because when we're thinking about goals, and so this is, if you're seeing the image on my screen, it's from a paper that we wrote called Investing Business Agility, but it's around evidence-based management, portfolio management, EVM-PM. So this is a quick innovation investment cycle. So if we're saying we understand value, we can measure value. We're thinking about that. And we're thinking about that in terms of outcomes. What does value mean to us and our customers? What are the outcomes that they're looking for? And we might be looking at a portfolio of products. And what goals do those actually go back to? The thing that's interesting and unfortunate, but it's interesting now, is that as we start to define and refine our goals, right? So maybe you have a goal backlog, is that the next thing that you're able to do there is to examine and abandon excess with. So what coronavirus has helped a lot of executives I've been talking to recently is to strip away the unnecessary work now. And it's that pressure that we have that has allowed them to do that, right? So we're really looking at the ROI of everything that we invest in. We're really coming in at an investment level. We're really trying to redesign the way and be careful about the way that we perceive anything that's innovative. We're trying to keep operations on. What are those goals? And let's keep super focused on that. So you have a whip there in terms of here's how many things that we can pursue. And that if you're thinking about an investment cycle there, then the things that we're going to do, and these should be obviously smaller bets, right? There should be smaller things. Let's see if we can have experiments, or if we have proposals, or the work that we're doing, how does that relate back to the goals? And if there's not, or if we do an evaluation of all the work that we have, and we find that only a few things are related back to the goals, let's keep those. But if we have new ideas, let's keep those going. And I would say, and people hear this all the time, smaller bets, smaller risks. And I think that that's a really something that we really need to pay attention to now, especially when we're talking to big upfront planning, all the risks that we take there. It creates a disconnect again at the enterprise level, right? So a lot of people, when we're talking about Agile, they go, oh, finance, can't deal with finance. Finance is your friend, right? Finance are the people that care about, you're putting something into the system, what are we getting out? And when you tell me about velocity and stories, I don't understand that because I don't know how to write that. into like our spreadsheets and what we're understanding, are we meeting our goals or not? This is a great conversation to have at that level and with management of, these are the goals that we're looking at, these are the outcomes, these are the things that we're going to try. How much, what is the maximum that we could invest into these experiments, right? And then reevaluate that funding as needed. And so you'll see define and refine goals, the WIP, propose experiments, right? And these are teams proposing experiments, evaluate the proposals, and these are probably the executive team. And we're going to run experiments. So we're working teams and management together, and we're looking at the progress. And we're looking at the progress in terms of value, goals, and outcomes. So there's much more in the EBN PM book, that paper that you can see on the scrum.org website. But really the things that you want to think about, again, is guiding investments based off goals, letting the teams propose experiments that help us pursue those goals so that we can align on our business objectives, right? That singular goal provides a great focus. We want to frequently reevaluate the funding. That's based on the evidence that we've been looking at in terms of the different KDVAs. And we're looking at definitely leveraging the bottom-up intelligence and working together and keeping people focused on working together on a goal so that we're not multitasking, because that is very expensive. So if we come back to this, and with my new little triangle, where we're thinking about the dimensions of value, goals, and outcomes. Again, what you see is the 3 Ps that I put there, which is power, perspective, and people. Now, we could talk about value, goals, and outcomes all day till we're blue in the face, and someone's going to say, well, we can't do this. And they're going to say, you know, leadership isn't in, or the teams, or the whatever, we can't do this. And I would say, you know, is there a small part of your business that you could? Is there part of this that you could start to implement? You don't have to do everything, but is there a part of this that makes sense that you can start? Because we're not talking about really anything structural change. We're saying, can we have a conversation about what's value for us? What are our goals and the outcomes of our customers, users, right? That just takes a little bit more than doing what's day to day, what's operational, what we've been used to. So we're not talking about structurally changing anything, but really just having these deep conversations, and to make sure if we're not meeting these outcomes, if we're not doing these things, get rid of them. I mean, that's the way we should be doing things, but also, you know, a lot of organizations, they're looking at things under the magnifying glass a little bit more, right? Just these are the times. However, I think that when we talk about those things, like I said, until we're blue in the face, the notion of the 3 Ps, power, perspective, and people, really come into play. Because for me, that's essentially the business agility part. What is your capability to actually cycle on value, goals, and outcomes? If you're doing these things and you're running experiments and you're trying to achieve, and we're just talking about empiricism, how can you actually do that if you are being held back by the notion of status, if you're oppressing people, if you're not taking different perspectives, whether that's taking perspective in terms of management or in terms of different teams that are actually doing the work. And one thing that becomes really, really apparent to me is when I see how long it takes an organization to make a decision, even a simple decision, right? And that all goes back into the power, the perspective, and the people. So we have power. I may not be talking about, you know, power in terms of job title. I might be talking about person who's been there forever, knows everything, and blocks everything. Person, and they may be doing that for whatever reason, right? And that's perspective. So perspective is that person won't change. Why? You talk about transparency, but you actually don't practice it, right? So this notion of power, perspective, and people, how do we actually balance those 3 things? I think that those 3 things we should be aware of. How do we balance it? How do we have those conversations? I think that a difficult word that people don't want to talk about is this notion of power. I want power, but people can want power, but that doesn't mean that you're necessarily taking power from someone else, right? It's not just a pie where you're cutting up a power pie. How can we change that mindset where it's we all are knowledgeable and we're all experienced and we all can work together and collaboratively will be better. So a lot of that is usually represented to me. We can talk about strong values, but the one thing is about which are focus, openness, respect, courage, and commitment. But it's really about how bloated is an organization and how long it takes them to make a decision. So how long does it take for your organization to make a decision? And the things that you can see in there when an organization isn't able to make a decision is because they might not really know what they're doing. So that's the goals. They might not really understand accountability. The leadership isn't accountable for the things that they have to do. They might be bloated with hierarchy. So you can't really make a decision because you need approval here and here and here. They may not have ownership correctly of a specific area. So, you know, somebody's thinking something here and needs to make a decision here, and you need somebody else to make an approval, and it goes back and forth. Whereas, you know, how could we bring that closer together? So the idea is, you know, can you look at those things in your organization? And it's really easy for me to say something like, hey, go and eliminate the things that have no value, but add time and cause delays. Before you even eliminate it, I would say, how could you look at those things right now and say, what processes do we have? Do we have roles, you know, positions that are just there because they've always been there? And it might be fine to say that role's been there, it's always been there, and we'll wait. But we understand that right now that's a bit of overhead. How can you change that role so that it's contributing to value more so than not? So those are really things that I think that, you know, there's a lot in here of things that you could identify, but again, the power, the perspective, and the people, that balance, right? When we think about an organization, how do we work together? It's really going to help drive us into the new triangle that I made, which was value, outcomes, and goals. So thinking about those three things and trying to optimize for those three things is where I'd urge people to think about. There's an interesting question that I asked before, and I asked actually our professional Scrum trainers, can you successfully deliver a project on time, on scope, on budget as defined? And a funny story was this PSC told me that he actually did that at a consulting company. He was able to do that. They actually came in, they actually came in earlier, and they got in trouble because they came in earlier. So because it didn't align with all the budget and the planning, they had to pretend that they were working for like a couple more weeks to get that done. So, you know, that's something that's just fixed into the system that doesn't have value, and it's not delivering value to the organization. So those are some quick thoughts that I want to share. And I want to show you some resources that you'll be able to read. So a lot of those thoughts are in there. We have, when I was talking about the evidence-based management, the key value areas, that's in the EBM management guide. So that's on scrum.org. We're actually doing an update on that now. The part that I showed with the investment loop, that's in a white paper called Investing for Business Agility. You can see that under portfolio management. And we do have some case studies. So those are in webinars on our website, and also through some different documents that you can read about how people have used this, experimented with it in different ways. Now, before I start taking questions, I want to make sure that we look at this. So, you know, if anything that I'm thinking about today, it's about what's going on in the different current events. So I want to make sure, as much as this is applicable to leadership in an organization, it's applicable to how we think about societies. And an organization is a society, but the one that we're all living in needs definitely a bit of light, and for people to become comfortable with feeling uncomfortable about what's going on. So for me, because I have this platform, and I know there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, apparently there might be not hundreds of you, you know, when I'm a first generation Chinese person, I'm in the Massachusetts area, and when I was 8 years old, I got told to go back to China in front of my Catholic school. Had no idea. And that has nothing that would make it relevant for me to understand what Black and brown brothers are going through right now. But what I want to say is, even though those are things that I will never understand, I want to make sure that everybody in this community, whether you think this is political or not, is that I will make my voice heard and say that I stand with you. And I do a lot of those things in terms of mentoring, donating, and I encourage everybody else to learn more, have conversations, and do those things too. So I understand that we can open up for questions now. We can talk about anything because I'm just here in the house. We're still locked in. My information is here, so you can email me at patricia.kong@scrum.org, or you can find me on LinkedIn, on Twitter. Happy to talk more. There are a lot of different thoughts that definitely could be dove into more. We're actually creating some more courses, and we're testing those right now. So if those are things that you're interested in too, and experiencing a beta workshop around evidence-based management, let me know. We're going to be running one at the end of June. So I understand I'm going to wait, and then the questions will magically come.
Yes, we do have a few questions. Blake asked, I really like how you pointed out that many organizations are time to market focused. Can you provide an example of how you influence leadership to change the focus from building things faster to eliminating overinvestment in a single value hypothesis?
So I think that goes why. So why do you want to go faster? Why are you trying to reduce costs? And to be able to have that conversation about what their goal ultimately is, right? And so that's a lot of the times when we can spin through and say, hey, we're going faster. We want to go faster, or you need to go faster. We're going agile because we need to go faster. Why do we need to go faster? Why do we need to be agile in the first place, right? So how can you have those conversations? And you can facilitate these in different ways, which is what I usually do. But it's kind of like the 5 whys. Why are you going through that? So that's a consulting answer. The other thing you can do is really say, hey, let's just see what we're doing. And you want us to go faster, then we can go as fast as you want, but they don't care, the customers. So value is not realized because, one, we might be doing things faster. We might be getting it out to the customer, but they don't care about it. They're not using the feature. They're not using the product. As a matter of fact, they don't like it. And we're now bloating the product with features, and that's costing us a lot of money, and we're paying a lot of money to maintain that. And that's a real life story. So there was a company where, and it's pretty typical where they say faster, more, and what we found is that we were spending more, I think it was $10,000 maintaining, and this is just a developer time, maintaining all the things that we built that people didn't use. And once you are able to put that dollar sign down to that conversation becomes much more real, right? And so now you can have an evidence-based conversation and show them how this notion of value is there for them to holistically understand how they can manage better decisions, make better decisions, and manage better. Thanks.
Thank you. Your recommendations. Who should set the standards of measurements? Team decisions or management decisions? And should these standards be made transparent so that teams know what they are measured against?
I think that it depends on what measures. So if we understand a goal and we're looking at the different value areas, so thank you for the question, then those are something that if I was, let's say, a product owner or a product person, I would be really interested in. If I am responsible for the health of the team and making sure that we're working in a fashion, I am also really interested in those decisions, in that information. Because if we're looking at outcomes, so are we hitting that outcome? Are we able to satisfy our customer? I want to have that visible to me. There has been times when it's the teams at the product level that come up with this. There's times that the Scrum Master comes up with this. but there should be collaboration and there should be visibility into this, right? So you can form a dashboard that is at a very high level, something that can speak to management and the teams, and you can have that visible. And it might just be, we're looking and we're working at this goal. These are the things that we've picked out from the different KVAs, and these are the experiments we're running, or these are the things that we're doing. Or we have these PBIs, and this is the measurement that we're looking at for this hypothesis. However, now if we're talking about what we would call like output metrics, those might sit with the team, because that's about, you know, giving them information on what they're doing, right? However helpful they may think that. But I wouldn't make all of that, you know, visible, because people start using data in different ways, right? So it's manipulating it in different ways. So it's about what makes sense. But there's something, you know, when we talk about, there's 40X when they talk about the coach's scoreboard and the player scoreboard, right? So we have a scoreboard, we have a dashboard, if you're looking at making things visible, that we can look at and say, okay, I understand, let's have a conversation. We're doing well, we're not doing well, what's going on here? You can have that focused conversation as an entire group, whereas, you know, other things, much like the retrospective, you know, that's for the team.
Thank you. So just thinking out loud, can the concept of evidence-based management be linked to the idea of minimalism, letting go of excesses and only keeping the continuous to add value to your life?
I mean, I guess it could. If we're talking about lean, right, it does. But if you're talking, I like it in terms of it's removing noise. When I think about minimalism and, you know, sustainability and all these things, what we're trying to do to have that kind of lifestyle, it may ask you to just focus on what you need. And so in that way, I could draw a link if I was thinking about what is the goal that we're focused on, and let's do those things. Let's not do other things until we achieve this goal, our group. Let's not focus on other things until, you know, the organization, until we understand where we are with these 3 goals. So in terms of focus, I think there's a thing there. In terms of minimalism and being lean, I like that it's saying, you know, let's keep things simple. And so if you are able to look at the KVAs and go, our organization is always, you know, our management is saying we need to improve our ability to innovate, then get focused on that. What is it that you need to improve to innovate? Now, why? Now you have 3 other areas you can choose from to say, how do those things relate together? Because let's get this holistic view going. And you're going to unveil, just like, you know, Scrum and Agile, you're going to unveil things. So when we looked at an innovation rate at a company, they said, Trisha, you know, that seems pretty normal. We spend 30%, that's what, you know, average in the industry. We spend 30% on innovation. And then we say, oh, really, do we? So, okay, we care about innovation. I don't understand why we're not getting what we expect out of this. And then when you actually measure it, what we found was that they weren't spending 30% on innovation. They were just budgeting that. What was actually getting done was maintaining and fixing all the things. 90% of that budget went there. So I think it just unveils a lot. There's just minimalism is making me think about, there was a suggestion, and I don't know how this belongs or not, but there's been a suggestion. So in the different key value areas, in the EVM guide, you'll find suggested metrics, suggested key value metrics, but essentially it's about make your own. But in this day and age, somebody had suggested, a PhD in Italy, that we make sustainability and contribution to society as part of current value. So I don't know if it fits into the current value of the company as we understand it now, or if it's something else, but that's something that's very interesting in terms of how we think, why do we do things? Do we really practice what we preach? Should that be in our key value areas? Do we have to measure that way? But that might be something that just lives in the mission of your company, right? So improving the profession, when I think about that Scrum.org, every time I make a decision, I say, am I helping to improve the profession? Or yes, Trisha, I could make a lot of money doing that, but if I was trying to improve the profession, I might think about this differently. And that's Ken Schwaber's voice in my head all the time.
Thank you.
Else?
Any advice to help influence leadership to shift from annual budgets and operating plans to more frequent iterative planning?
So maybe you want to send them that paper first, but I think the notion of if you, and that's literally what people have done. We're working on creating more assets for people to share with their companies, but the notion of really repeating and iterating and thinking about what are our value goals and outcomes, how are we funding for that, how can we be sure, how can we lock down in a plan for a year, but then expect, that we'll be able to be agile about anything that we planned. It's just all a hypothesis, right? And the conversation that I start to have here is around risk, right? So when we talk about finance, those people care about risk. We're trying to balance risk. Right now, I would be very, very, very interested in understanding risk. And so this is, if you're taking smaller bets and you're saying we're focused on these outcomes, we're not just trying to throw stuff at the wall anymore. We have goals, we're looking at outcomes. Do they actually bring us value as a company? Do they deliver? Do they contribute to our business value? Do they decrease non-value adding things? Are they helping us to reduce risk? Those are the conversations that I would have again and again, and I would look at those things, and I would try to see what is possible. So that the flip that you're trying to make there is this notion of budgeting versus investing. So think about that, and I would say my colleague threw this, is that portfolio management, and I would say how you invest is the means to which an organization achieves agility. How you invest dictates how agile you can be. If you are investing and budgeting and saying we're locked in for a year, think about what that means. That means the traditional, if I don't use it, I lose it. So we're not doing what's best for the organization at that point, right? We're competing for budgets, we're competing for priorities. So how could we shrink that a little and actually reevaluate funding so that we could see, so that we have this ability to pivot? Because right now, organizations needed to pivot, Scrum.org being one, from, for instance, our training, how did that become virtual? This conference being another. What's that ability for us to pivot? How much would we be willing to invest in this experiment to see if it works? Those type of conversations, budgeting versus investing. And, what does this mean to the entire organization? And, maybe just using those KVAs as a tool to have that tool of, okay, what are we going to look at here? Then choose a small part. You want to get started, choose a small strategic area.
All right, we are at time. However, there's one last question that I wanted to get in here. After you left, what did you tell that business owner who wanted the org transformation in 6 months?
This is like recorded and everything, right?
All right. Thank you very much for.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I hope everybody is staying safe and staying strong. I look forward to seeing the other talks. Maybe I'll be asked to participate again. Maybe we'll talk about status and people and all that other stuff another good time. But please keep watching. We're always pushing out more information, and we have time to do that right now. So thank you for having me.
Thank you all so much for attending.